speaker today. I'm going to introduce him, and then we'll have a second introduction. It's the kind of guy we have, a two introduction type of guy. I've lived in Cedar City for about 10 years, and one of the first things that surprised me about this town, I moved here sight unseen. I knew nothing about it moving to Cedar City. I was surprised to find out that there is an aerospace industry in Cedar City. Does that surprise anyone else? It certainly surprised me, and the reason is largely because of our guest today, David Grant. He is the chairman of MSC Aerospace. MSC is Metalcraft, Cyberjet, and Cedar Building Associates. Those three companies. He's the chairman of the holding company. He's got a great background, very interesting background. He's the director of economic development for the state. He was the director of economic development for the state of Utah. He spent 12 years on the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents oversees higher education in the state of Utah. He started 12 businesses, and he was named by the Small Business Administration the SBA Person of the Year. He got his start at the University of Utah. He studied mathematics and got a master's degree in finance. He taught real estate and corporate finance at BYU. He's here with his wife Judy and his niece Professor Wilford, who will spice up this introduction.
No, I really didn't want to do this. So I'm Amanda Wilford, and I am David Grant's niece. I'm currently the MBA director. I don't get a chance to see too many faces right now because I teach mostly online, so it's great to see people. But one of the things that's really cool is I went to undergrad here at SUU, and I really had the opportunity to really grow and develop as a student. In addition to that, I have some great family here as well. And it's been awesome through the years to be able to see the different companies and ventures that my uncle's been able to participate in, and how those have grown and developed through the years. And while I was a student here, I also had the opportunity to work at Metalcraft. I was an accounting student, so I worked in the accounting department and got some real life experience with that. And just to see how he's been able to manage his businesses has been really exciting. So without further ado, David J. Grant.
Dr. Wilford's really modest. Before she came back here, she taught here 7-8 years ago, but before she came back, she was teaching at in Spain at one of the top 10 online MBA programs in the world. She's really quite renowned. She's published. She's smart. If you have a chance to take a class from her, you really ought to. She's tough. Sometimes her student ratings don't reflect how really good she is because she's tough, and you know they're all correlated if you're a tough grader. So if you want an easy A, she's not the class, but if you really want to learn, Dr. Wilford's really great. And her and I have just recently participated in a joint venture together. We bought 2 steers in October, and she's been in charge of medicating them and feeding them, and she's let me help her a little bit, and we just had them slaughtered. And her father's a veterinarian, so she was consulting with him how to really fatten them up. She was giving them 18 pounds of grain for breakfast, or 9 for breakfast?
9 for breakfast.
9 pounds of grain for breakfast and 9 pounds for dinner. And when they slaughtered those things, they grade beef. You know, you get prime, select, choice. These are the prime, best of all beef. Good color in the meat, and she's going to help me eat the liver and tongue and heart later this month.
No.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. I haven't done this for several years. Art Porter used to have me come every year when he was over this, but he's kind of a has-been, isn't he? And Tyler's been here for 10 years, so I'm sure it's been at least 10 years. But I always look forward to talking to students. It reminds me of my days at BYU when I taught, and at the University of Utah when I taught there. And so it's fun to come back and just have a little bit of experience. I really was destined to become an academic. That's what my dad did, and my mother thought that's what I had to do, but it wasn't in my heart. And I liked it, but I just couldn't see a way to make enough money to support a large family. My wife and I have 9 children. And, but now they're paying these academicians more money than anybody on the planet. So, Dean, I don't know what you've done to get the salaries up, but it wasn't that way when I was a kid 40 years ago. So good job getting a little more money for these teachers. Do I wear this the whole time? Is that required? Please wear it the whole time? Okay, just asking a question. I'm not one of these anti-face mask people. But, so I asked Dr. Wilford, I said, what does entrepreneurship mean to the SUU students? And she told me what she thought it meant to you. You tell me what you think it means. What does it mean to be entrepreneurial or to be an entrepreneur? Do they get class participation points, Dr. Stillman?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, right here.
Always have your eyes open for a new venture route.
Okay, have your eyes open for a new venture. It's pretty good. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Create and build a business.
Create and build a business.
To be innovative.
To be innovative. So you can either start a new business, build a business, or within a business, maybe be innovative. Start a new division, new product line, or something like that. It's kind of broad-based, isn't it? Today, I'm going to focus on the definition of starting a business. I've done it 12 times, and I think that's where I can give you a real-life experience the best. But the principles apply whether you're innovative at a big company, starting a new product line, or you're keeping your eyes out for starting a new division within a company. All the principles are the same, but I'm going to focus kind of on starting a new business. Is that okay with you? How many here would like to start a business? And the rest of you, why are you here? Because you want to be innovative within some other business? It's okay. You don't need to start a new business to be entrepreneurial. So there's 5 critical things from my experience, and maybe 6. I'm calling the 5 pillars of entrepreneurship, successful entrepreneurship. But there is a 6th, and that is you have to have an appetite, or you have to be able to bear risk. You can't be risk averse and be an entrepreneur. And I would further suggest that if you plan to have a spouse, that you better find a spouse that's not terribly risk averse. I was really blessed. Stand up, Judy, so they can see my beautiful wife. I was really blessed to find a wife that grew up on a farm. Her dad was a rancher / farmer. And I had no idea when I was getting married what any of these things I'm about to tell you. But every year her dad would plant in Wyoming on their farm, and sometimes in the fall they'd harvest and sometimes they wouldn't. He never got a paycheck until he sold his lambs or he sold the grain, whatever it was in the fall. It was kind of a lot of risk. And they just lived with that. And I've since learned that a lot of people live their lives where they've grown up with their parents getting a paycheck. And they just don't know how to deal with not getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. It's really hard on them. And I've had partners where their spouse has not been able to live with the erratic nature of getting paid as an entrepreneur starting a new business. And it's really tough on a marriage. And so if you haven't already picked your spouse and you really want to start a business, put that on your list of considerations. Pick someone who can deal with the uncertainty of not getting a paycheck for a while. Or maybe even the charge card people calling you and say, hey, you haven't paid your bill this month. What's going on? Well, I didn't get paid this month. And so you live off your charge cards a little bit. Doesn't happen to all entrepreneurs, but most have a pretty rough go of it. Just because that's the nature of entrepreneurship. You start something and you're always undercapitalized and it takes longer than you think it's going to take. I love the story of the founder of Federal Express. He was down on his luck, didn't have enough to even make his last payroll. And he went to Las Vegas and did a double or nothing bet or something. I don't know all the exact things. I haven't told the story for 20 years, but he won, went back, made payroll, and you know what Federal Express has done today. But you're going to have some uncertainty in your life as an entrepreneur, and so you have to have an appetite for risk. And if you don't, and interesting enough, none of my 9 children, I pushed them all away from entrepreneurship because it's kind of tough. And there's the glamour side when you're successful. Everybody thinks, wow, look at this guy. You know, the Bezos with Amazon, or I don't even know how you say his name, Bezos? Or the guy with Microsoft, or the guy with Word, what's his name, Alan Ashton, or whoever the really multi-billionaire successful. It's got so much glamour, everybody wants to do it. It's kind of like wanting to be Tom Brady when you're in high school playing football. There's only one Tom Brady in the whole world, right? And so you really have to think inside you. Now, my kids have entrepreneurial tendencies. They participated in various entrepreneurial projects, but none of them have really put it all on the line without having a paycheck kind of backing them up. And they become professionals. They become no doctors, but attorneys and accountants and school teachers and those kinds of things, and they're happy, but they don't have to live with the uncertainty of not getting a paycheck. Have a couple of kids that are kind of in entrepreneurial businesses now, a son that has an accounting business he owns, another son-in-law who has a septic tank business, and they're both doing very well. They've kind of come through the process. They don't have lots of employees, which adds to the risk. MSC Aerospace has 250 employees, and we have to make them payroll every 2 weeks. We don't sweat it as much today as we did 10 years ago, but it's a challenge. When 9/11 came, we had 350 employees, and we went down to less than 100 in 2 weeks, and that's not fun to have to let people go. So kind of question yourself. If you raised your hand, you want to start a business, do you really have an appetite for risk, or are you risk averse? It's a really pivotal question that requires some soul searching. Do you have a companion, if you're married, that's going to support you in that? Because it's a team effort. And I wouldn't be where I'm at today without my wife, who I had no idea at the time was being prepared by her dad in agriculture for such a venture. And that might be the most important thing, even though I'm going to tell you 5 pillars of entrepreneurship. Okay? Anybody have any questions about that? How do you know if you have an appetite for risk? How are you going to measure that? Try it. That's one way. Yes, sir?
I feel like just getting out of your comfort zone and trying something new.
Willing to fail. Of the 12 businesses I've started, 3 of them failed. It's a good point. How do you deal with failure? Sorry? You learn from it. Excellent. Okay? All right, here are the 5 pillars. These aren't in any order of importance because they're all important. Human capital. 2, financial capital. 3, infrastructure. And 4 and 5 are kind of related, and some people put them together. Product / idea and markets. Okay? Let me just talk to you about each of those. Human capital, human resources, is really an essential ingredient. You have to have people that kind of have some experience. You may not have much, but you have to surround yourself with people that are talented, more talented than you are. And you can't be insecure about it. We hired Amanda as our accountant, and she's far smarter than I am. And you just have to surround yourself with good people. You might want a board of advisors. That can be threatening, intimidating. Say, oh, they're not going to like the way I'm doing it. You have to have good professional help, attorneys, accountants that can advise you. But surround yourself with good people. You have to hire great employees. People are really important in the equation. And a lot of times when businesses fail, and most new startups fail within 5 to 10 years, it's because they haven't amassed the right mix of human capital. And it costs money sometimes. Good entrepreneurs tend to share the risk with really good people. They'll do incentive stock options or equity participations or take on partners. That tends to tie their success to your success, and your interests are aligned. You don't have to do that, but aligning your interests with key people is a good idea. Any questions on human capital? The most important thing the dean does is hire good faculty, right? And even if they're better than you, that's the way you build a great program. It's pretty tough to be better than the dean, but she might hire on occasion somebody better than her, right? So that's the first thing. And again, they're no priority. Any questions on human capital? Yes, sir.
What are things that you look for when you hire someone?
Let me tell you a Walt Disney story. Before he hired key people, he always took them out to dinner. And he'd watch very closely, and if they grabbed the salt shaker and put salt on their food before they tasted the food, he wouldn't hire them. Why do you think that is?
Because they altered something that might not have been altered.
Yeah, they just altered it without even testing it. That's one ingredient, is you want somebody who's going to think analytically and question. Somebody that's not going to be intimidated to speak up to you. Typically, entrepreneurs are pretty strong personality people. And you have to find somebody that's not a yes sir or yes ma'am person. I look for people that have good, strong work ethic. And today, this will sound as an insult, and I'm talking to a bunch of millennials, but the millennials don't quite have the same work ethic. They're all about lifestyle, quality of life, and that's great. But I want somebody that's going to work hard. The Jewish people have a saying. They say, I'll work like you won't work for 5 or 10 years, and then I'll live like you can't live for the rest of my life. They understand you got to put a lot of hard work in to make something bloom and blossom. And they'll give it their all, sacrificing nearly everything. So that's the kind of personality you have to find. Does that answer your question? Okay, any other questions about human capital? Let's talk about the second one, financial capital. There's lots of different variations on these two, but there's primarily two kinds of capital: debt and equity. And you can have several different varieties of both. You can have convertible debt or bank debt or personal debt or charge card debt. You can have preferred stock, common stock, passive stock, non-voting stock. But when it all boils down to either get debt or equity to finance your business. And a lot of people think the banks have this great responsibility to fund startup companies. It just doesn't happen. If you're planning on bank debt to finance a startup company, unless you have some rich uncle that's going to guarantee it or something, it's really tough to call on a bank to finance your growth. At least until you get a track record and you get some cash flows going. And other people will loan you debt at a very high interest rate, and they'll do it as a means of taking you over. So you have to be careful with that. But properly used, leverage is okay. I taught corporate finance at BYU, and I happen to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they teach their members don't go into debt, except for buying a house and getting an education. They don't want that. What they're really preaching against in that church is consumer debt. I used a little consumer debt to finance my businesses. Wasn't so smart, but we lucked out. But we had one of the apostles of their church come and visit at the business school. And we said, here we are in business school teaching our young people about the optimal capital structure, meaning the right balance between debt and equity. Cost of capital. Any of you study that stuff in finance? And we said, what do you think about us teaching our students that debt's okay? And he happened to be a CFO of a company before he became an apostle. He says, it's fine, teach them. But you have to have the right balance between debt and equity. If you're over leveraged, you're in real trouble. If you want to drive your cost of capital down, you borrow some, because equity typically costs more money than debt in the long run. And so you've got to think about your capital structure. And what I said to you earlier is most people are undercapitalized. They don't raise enough capital to fund a startup venture because they miss some things and they're surprises. And the second thing is it takes them longer than they think. Instead of taking 3 years, it takes 5 years. So when it comes to capital, you have to have enough. And you have to have the right balance of debt and equity. And you have to match your equity partners, who are going to have some say and control in what you do, with what you put in. And a lot of times people starting businesses don't have a lot of money to bring to the table. The hardest $1 million to earn is your first $1 million. Because you don't have any capital. You have to rely on other people's capital. But as you get going and you get $1 million and you reinvest it, the second million's the second hardest, and the 10th million's the 10th hardest million to raise. It just gets easier because capital's an important part. One of the things I've observed is that people who don't have financial capital think that human capital is more important and good ideas are more important than financial capital. People with money think money's the most important. There's a golden rule in entrepreneurship. Do you know what it is? He with all the gold makes all the rules. If you're going to put up $2 million to start a business with me, and you come to me and you don't have any money, but you've got a great idea, you've got 4 of the 5, and I've got the money, I'm going to want control. He with all the gold makes all the rules, right? So you have this balancing equation, and it's not easy to manage. But you need to have the proper capital structure and understand the role of debt and equity. Find partners that match your values, where you reach agreement, and then strike a deal. But make sure you get enough money. Don't become undercapitalized, or don't be short-sighted in how much it's really going to cost, either time or amount. Because if you do, it's a leading cause of businesses failing. Any questions about financial capital? Yes?
How would you take basically what you just said and put it into a non-profit business?
Well, I always tell people I am not an eleemosynary organization. I exist to make a profit. I'm not a not-for-profit. And for me, profit is the ultimate measure of efficiency. And so I don't know that I could run a not-for-profit. I have a relative who's trying to do a not-for-profit, and she's really struggling to raise money. And I said, and she's looking for quite a bit of money. Nice relative. I've been in business with her husband before. But people don't want to invest in nonprofits. They don't mind contributing if they believe in the cause, but then you're not raising debt or equity, you're asking for contributions. And yet even nonprofits have to have a capital structure. They have to have working capital. And so you're out asking for donations and you're pleading the cause. I don't have any experience in that, and I have a hard time asking people for money for my cause. I contribute generously to charitable organizations, mostly to the church to which I belong, but I help people. I made a $5 donation yesterday at the gas station to a lady who didn't have enough money to buy gas to get to Las Vegas, and I thought, we really want you to go on to Las Vegas. We don't want you staying here. So I made a small charitable contribution. My wife's shaking her head. I probably shouldn't have said that. But if you'd have seen her, you'd have made the same judgment. So I can't really help you. You need to have capital, operating capital, working capital. But you're asking people to donate to a cause, and so I guess you better believe in the cause, and you got to find other people that believe in it. So that's just off the top of my head. Good question, though. And you can be entrepreneurial and go do charitable things. But most people want a return on investment. Other questions about capital? Okay. Infrastructure. That can mean a lot of things. But if you're going to start a business that requires a lot of labor, you're going to need a workforce. Now that's human capital, but the infrastructure says, where am I going to do it? If you're going to start a business that requires a lot of student employment, you better get by a college or university. You want to look at the fiber optics, because in today's world, bandwidth's pretty important. Where are you going to put your servers? You're going to have servers some off-site place with data storage in a cloud. Infrastructure is a really important consideration. Another very important part of the consideration is government regulations. In my early years, we expanded our MTI business and we bought a facility in California. It was a lousy place to do business. After 2 years, we said enough of California, or we're not going to have a California plant. We'd have employees there get a little disgruntled and then sue us. For whatever reason, their toe itched, or the restroom was too dirty, or they thought we were horrible employers. And they knew that if they would settle for less than $20,000, we'd probably just pay a nuisance settlement. Rather, we knew we were never would lost on a legal battle. But the cost of fighting the courts on employment issues is always a minimum of $20,000, can go up to $100,000. And so people would blackmail you in a sense. They'd hold you hostage. And we said enough is enough. We're not going to keep paying these terrorists to sue us and take $20,000 as a nuisance settlement. The first one we thought, we're going to fight this and show we can win. Well, we fought and we won, but we spent $120,000. The next one we thought, do we want to spend another $120,000 to win? Do we care if we're right, or can we just settle for 20 and get rid of this problem? California's got lots of other problems. Companies are leaving California right and left. Why do you think they're leaving California? Taxes. Not just taxes, but they have a lot of policies. I guess it all could fall under the umbrella of taxes. But it's a lousy place to start a new business. Very expensive. Now, if you needed location to be in the seaport and start a cruise business, you might be forced to consider California or Florida. You'd have to be on a coastal site, right? Where you could bring cruise ships in and out of. So there are some reasons when you might still consider California. But Elon Musk, he's getting out. A lot of other Silicon people are leaving. They're calling Salt Lake the Silicon Slopes because people don't like the California infrastructure. Does that make sense to you? What else might be an infrastructure consideration? Sometime, yes, sir.
Transport and shipping.
Excellent. Proximity to markets. That was on my list, actually, but perfect. Metalcraft started because Hallmark greeting cards wanted to be on a rail line, and we have rail service in Cedar City, and they figured out the way to save money was to be equidistant to all the markets they served, and Cedar City had a great location with a railroad. They probably would have picked St. George, but they didn't have a railroad. They just picked this as central to their markets. It was a hub. And so Hallmark, when they decided, okay, we're changing our distribution policy, then Metalcraft, which used to build store fixtures for Hallmark, became for sale, and I was able to pick it up for pennies on the dollar. But the reason they're originally here is because of rail access. Sometimes you need airports. Sometimes you don't. but proximity to markets and to suppliers and transportation hubs are important. Okay, so you have to look at infrastructure when you're starting a business. If you want to start a farm, I'd recommend you don't pick the place my wife grew up. She lived in Alta, Wyoming, at the slopes of Grand Targhee Ski Resort, over the mountain from Jackson Hole. Why do you think I'd tell you not to put a farm in Alta, Wyoming? Yeah, a very short growing season. If you want to be a farmer, go someplace you can get 3 or 4 crops a year, not 2. Does that make sense? And how many times did your dad lose his crops because it snowed in September, October? It's a tough place to make a living as a farmer. Now, maybe you can do livestock there, but you have to decide what your market is and pick a place that fits and think about it. Any more questions on infrastructure? Yes, sir.
What about proximity to your own business? So like, oftentimes one of the things that I was wondering is if you wanted to live in a little green area, which you'd be running the business not living next to, but you wanted to start a business where it would be most effective, what's a good like either idea or advice surrounding that? Like where you want to live for the rest of your life versus where you need your business to be?
If you're going to have a lot of people there, depends if you're people intensive or not, I think you've got to be hands-on and be present. And so you and your family have to decide how much time you want to spend commuting. It's pretty tough to manage people remotely. We're finding, we have offices in San Antonio, and they've been really tough about closing people down through the pandemic. We're finding that our engineers are actually more productive working from home. But our assembly people, our mechanics, our R&D flight crews, they have to be there. We can't build parts for airplanes unless we're on site. And so it'll be dependent on the type of business you pick. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if you have to manage people, they're hands-on, you probably want to be pretty close to it. Being an absentee manager of people that have to be on site making things is pretty tough. I guess that's my advice. Okay, 5 more minutes. I've got 2 things. I'm going to maybe combine them. You've got to have a great product / idea. But that's not enough. You have to be able to market it. When I was going through business school, we had this great article, and I just checked on the internet before I left this morning. It's still a pretty popular topic. But it's called the Building a Better Mousetrap Fallacy. Have you ever studied, any of you here at this school, Building a Better Mousetrap Fallacy, a Harvard business case or anything like that? What's Building a Better Mousetrap Fallacy?
Somehow you're smarter than all the people that have built mousetraps for many, many years, and you're going to be unique without having anything unique about it.
Yeah, that's part of it. You think your product's really good and you're myopic. You don't see. Another part of it is that the mousetrap may really be better. May be totally superior. But what if it costs 20 times as much? Or how do you market it? You've grown up in an era where the internet's a great way to market things, right? So you have a little bit different advantage than they did when I was in business school 40 years ago. In those days, we didn't have the internet to market it, and so they spent a lot of time, how are you going to get your mousetrap known? How are you going to market it? So simply having a better product in and of itself doesn't mean you'll be successful. You have to be able to produce it at a competitive price, distribute it, market it, and they're kind of interlinked. But if you have an inferior product, and some people do, they're still able to succeed, I'd always prefer a better product to an inferior product. But it's not just the better product. You've got to look at all the ancillary things like cost to build it, cost to distribute it, cost to market it, how are you going to get it out. And you can't become myopic just on having a better product or think that yours is better than someone else when it may or may not be. You have to be honest enough to have independent evaluation. So a good product, a good idea is great. A lot of people come to me and say, I've got this great idea, will you finance it? And sometimes I think, wow, that really is a good idea. In one situation, we did it, and it was the best idea. It was how to underwrite insurance by looking at people's drug records. Everything's treated today with medications and drugs, prescriptions. And we struck deals with the biggest pharmacies in the country. And if I can know what drugs you're on, I can know if you've got health problems. And we clearly could save insurance companies billions of dollars if we could get the people that were applying, and they're willing to share their information if they want life insurance. If they say, yeah, you can have access to my medical records. And then you go to the pharmacies and the doctors and you find out, because there's databases that exist, HIPAA protects the information, but if they release it, we could tell what a person's life expectancy was just by looking at what medications they're on. Truly a superior product. But we way underestimated the cost and the time to get to market. And one of the big life insurance companies invested in us with debt. We thought we could succeed. We didn't. They took over the company, and now they've made the billions, not me. I consider that a failure. The idea was a better idea. But even if you have a great idea, do you have the resources, the team, the financial capital, the infrastructure to have it be successful? So don't get myopic on the product or idea. It may be the best, it may not be, but you've got to look at all the other factors that go into it. So the right product and idea to fit your business model is really important. Okay. Last one's markets, and then I'll answer questions. Well, you guys know. You just got to figure out a way to market it. And today it's easier than ever with the internet. But still, you have to have creative people. One of my sons-in-law's business he's got a master's degree in it. It's social marketing. He's been trained. There's all kinds of science behind internet marketing. And a lot of us think we can just do it. And you can, kind of. But there is a science behind internet marketing. And the really successful people are getting the human capital to make it work. And it's not cheap. But it tends to pay pretty big dividends if you know how to do it the right way. And there's a whole field of science behind it. So that's my presentation. Now, last 10 minutes. Any question you want to ask? I weigh 350 pounds. I don't know why they'd call me the small business person of the year. I'm clearly the largest business person that was ever there. So that answers my weight question.
Just, on your 3 businesses you said that failed, what was the biggest contributor to that?
I told you about one of them. I was in a marketplace that I didn't have near enough money. That was the medication business. We started building heat sinks. Every computer puts heat sinks in the computer to take heat away from the processors. And we thought we could compete with Intel. One of my partners used to work for Intel. But we way underestimated the power of Intel. You don't compete with Intel when you're a startup business, unless you have some barrier to entry. That's another thing on markets. If you can find barriers to entry, that's really a good thing. One of the cool barriers to entry in the aviation world is there are so many manufacturing specifications by the Department of Defense and the FAA that it's really tough to qualify yourself and certify yourself to build aircraft parts. It's really expensive to get in building airplanes, so there's a barrier to entry. But we just couldn't break through the Intel thing. And then the third one, I got involved with my dad as a PhD in chemistry. And it's called CTAR, and it just didn't go anywhere. We tried to start it with government grants. There's small government grants, SBIC programs, maybe you've heard of them. And again, it was lack of capital. Yes, sir?
Do you have any book recommendations?
Book recommendations? There's a great book on stochastic processing. I don't even know if you can buy it anymore. But it deals with processes, and I think it's called The Goal. And then it's a series of 3. Some Jewish guy who's a mathematician wrote it. But you have to understand stochastic processing if you're going to be in manufacturing. Where the bottlenecks are. How to do that. Another thing I like is books that deal with metrics. It's just a corny little book, and I don't know if it's on the bestseller list, but it's called The Game of Work. And basically, this person developed metrics and made work a game for his employees. But what's measured typically improves. And if you go out to Metalcraft, and we may have you in April if things ease up a little bit, you'll see metric boards all over the place. We try and measure progress. Because when performance is measured, it really does improve. So those are just two ideas.
One thing that I'm thinking a lot about in terms of like success is that some of the largest contributors are demographics, so like what your culture is, you know, what you came from, that kind of thing. Would you say that success is often largely contributed by the culture that you develop yourself in, like a culture of success?
Culture is important. And I'd put that in the human capital area. You want to develop the right culture. But I believe in today's world that you can compete in any culture. We're working for Boeing, and our culture here in Cedar City is 95% of us want to go to church on Sunday that work for us. And we got the point that Boeing was around 70-80% of our business at one point. That's no longer the case. It's called concentration of risk in an audit report. So we don't like anybody to be more than 25 to 35% of our business. But we were heavily concentrated building parts for Boeing. And they couldn't get parts fast enough because the demand for airplanes at the time was super high. They came to us and said, we want you to work on Sundays. We said, that's going to be hard for us. Our culture doesn't really support that. And we said to them, we'll make a deal with you. We'll build more in 6 days a week than any of your other suppliers are working 7 days a week. Let's run a test, and if we succeed, then you quit asking us to work on Sundays. We never did work on Sundays, but it took about 3 months, and we were outperforming every supplier in America. Because people get tired. It's not just a religious principle, it's a physical principle. That people can't work 7 days a week in and week out, and become very productive. And we close down midnight on Saturday and start up 1 o'clock in the morning on Monday. But our people had a day to rest, and that was a cultural thing, but Boeing respected us for it. Our prices were better, we put out more volume, we were more efficient, and we got over this cultural thing. They said, well, if you're going to have this religious thing, we're going to drop you. Because we explain it as partly a religious culture. But you can overcome those cultural barriers, in my opinion, if you have the fortitude to do it. So we don't work on Sundays. And we're better for it, and our employees are healthier and better. And the 6 days they work, and sometimes we work 6 days a week, they're more productive. Next question. Am I getting too religious for your business school here? Dean? Well, I'm just telling you practical principles of efficiency. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you say you started 12 businesses, but I'm sure you have many more business ideas than just 12. So I guess what I want to know is how you decide what businesses you're actually going to like go for it with, like which ideas you're going to try to make it into like a big scale business, and which ones you just kind of discard. Like how do you make those decisions?
A lot of times I think I had a really good idea, then I'd go out and try and raise money. And the people with money would say, no, we're not going to invest. And so by default, if you can't raise the money, you can't get the team together. I looked at buying a fishing lodge up in West Yellowstone area. And I couldn't get financing for it. So I didn't do it. A lot of times financing is the reason. Timing. What may be a good idea today may not be a good idea 5 years from now, or vice versa. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Mostly it's, can you get the money to do it? Yes?
So were a lot of your businesses built to sell, or were you building and then decided at some point that you needed to build another possible to go outside?
A combination. I've been in all sorts of different fields. Library automation, internet provider, real estate, manufacturing, this drug company, and so they're all kind of different ideas, and I'd start, but I can say that in the last few years, some of the businesses that, for example, are associated with MSC Aerospace, we started with Metalcraft, and then Cyberjet was an add-on. Cedar Building is a real estate holding company. It was there to support the other companies. We bought our own real estate. But we started another little company called Cybercraft, which is a jet operating company, leasing company. And so as I've become more successful, we've used money to start businesses that were ancillary or supportive or add-ons. But in the early going, it was independent, new ideas, do this for a few years, sell it, then do something else. Good question. Dean, you get the last question.
Well, it's really a comment, and that is back to your principle of culture. I think one of the most important things that you have to understand is your customer and your consumer, and that is not only your Boeing, it's your employees that work for you. And I think that one of the most important things that you've talked about several things, but one thing that stands out in my mind is having your employees understand your principles and what's important to them, and knowing what's important to your employees makes them feel valued, and they'll work and perform better on the job. And so I think that that's a really important culture. You asked if religion, but I think if you look at the principle behind it, that's
well, I answered the culture question with a religious answer, but thank you. Well, Dr. Stillman, it's 12:20.